Another government quota hire. Let's see what this one's going to testify about.
Will be the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Mr. Slusher.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon.
Wow, Colonel Bars.
How are you employed?
Through the Minneapolis Police Department.
What is your current position?
My current position is the inspector of the 5th Precinct.
Right. How long have you been the inspector of the 5th Precinct?
Since January 31st this year.
What was your immediate rank and assignment prior to that?
The commander of the training division.
Now, I'd like you to tell the jury a little bit about yourself. First, could you tell us about your educational background in law enforcement?
Sure. So my 2-year associate's degree is in law enforcement through Minneapolis Community and Technical College. My 4-year bachelor degree is in police science through St. Mary's University. My master's degree is in public safety administration from St. Mary's University. I'm a graduate of the Northwestern Police Staff and Command, and I'm just about to complete a 2-year course in United States Army Sergeant Major's Academy, which is equivalent to a master's in leader.
So in addition to being a police officer, you're also in the Minnesota National Guard, is that right?
I am.
At what rank?
E9 Sergeant Major.
Okay. And just for the uninitiated, can you describe where that falls within the ranks of the enlisted?
That is the top enlisted rank that you can achieve.
How long have you been in the Minnesota National Guard?
Over 23 years.
Have you ever deployed?
I have.
Where?
To Bosnia on a peacekeeping mission, and then to Iraq for almost 2 years on a Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Thank you. Can you please begin
She's been around a little bit. I'll give her that.
your law enforcement career with the Minneapolis Police Department?
Sure. So in 1999, I worked with the 2nd Precinct. I did a little time promoted to sergeant, where I worked sex crimes investigations, and then 4th Precinct Patrol Supervisor, and then 1st Precinct Patrol Supervisor, mostly overseeing 911 response, and then our community response teams, and Foot Patrol. And then I went to the assault unit to do investigations, and then violent criminal investigation team with a detective. I was then promoted in December 2019 to the rank of lieutenant. And I should say during that time, I led the SWAT crisis negotiator team for 5 out of the 7 years. When I became a lieutenant, I was assigned to the training division to create leadership and professional development programs for the department. And then I took on the field training officer program. I was promoted to commander of training in April 14th, 20 community service officers, the academy, police academies, the in-service training, patrol operations, recruitment, hiring background.
Thank you. And
Okay, so this is my problem with quota hires. She's been around and she's got pretty good credentials. But because agencies are required to hire people because of their sex and color, most people reasonably jump to conclusion and believe that she was probably promoted because she was a female. And the only way to stop that is to stop hiring people for sex and color. And then we know when people are in positions, they earned it. So I know I'm going to get some hate for calling her quota hire. Her credentials sounds pretty good. She's got some good education. She seems like she's got some good experience. But did she get it because she was a female and they didn't want to give the schools and all that to males? Or did she earn it? We don't know. If they didn't have quota hires, then we would know.
as a person who was in command of the training center, are you familiar with the basic curriculum that was offered at that center during the time? Are you also familiar with the various staff and components who provided training
Great.
at that
Is that
center?
a question?
Yes.
Before we get into a more thorough description of the training center, I need to ask if you're familiar with an individual by the name of Derek Chauvin.
I am.
How are you familiar with that person?
We worked on the same shift. We were community service officers together.
Back prior to becoming a police officer?
Correct.
So you've known this person for approximately how long?
Almost 20 years.
Do you recognize Derek Chauvin in the courtroom today?
I do.
Would you please point to him and describe what he's wearing?
I was sitting over there in a navy blue suit.
May the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant, worked for the Minneapolis Police Department contemporaneously. Did you go through academy training?
I did.
Hey, describe that
Oh my God, come on.
practical portion of
I would ride with a field training officer.
first, generally the training center. Where is it located? At the time,
Training facility. For training, we had full-time instructors. Oversaw the use of force program.
service training now.
So pre-service is our police academies. We have two different types of police academies, a recruit and a cadet program.
We've
So
already
they will-
heard all this.
Currently, it's changed a little bit since heavy emphasis on the policy academy.
If you, one moment, Your Honor, if I may.
Good Lord.
Thank you, Your Honor. Right, and so defensive tactics instructors and teams, is that right?
Yes.
They typically show some kind of a PowerPoint presentation. As the academy, they're going to go through that officers need to be aware of tactics, is that right?
Yes.
And so is it true that sometimes field training officers will receive instruction in defensive tactics, for example, just the same as someone in pre-service training?
Correct.
And what is the purpose of making sure that the field training officers are aware of what the training is in pre-service?
So there's consistency of how we grade and how we evaluate recruit officers on the street.
And was the defendant a field training officer?
He was.
Do you know how long he was a field training officer?
I do not know off the top of my head.
Did you select him as a field training officer?
I did.
Oh, that's good. She's testifying. If she's got a lot of credibility, why did she pick him?
Variety of different courses that are taken to keep records of.
Minnesota Post Board, which is our peace officer standards and training, 48 hours of continuing education over the course of 3 years. And with that training has to be annual use of force, weapons qualifications, mental health crises, procedural justice. So a third of that training, 16 hours roughly out of that 48 hours, has to be in compliance with the Minnesota Post Board. And so keeping those records are critical to make sure we can, when we bring them to Post Board, they can do an audit on them.
And you rely on those records in order to, in fact, make these reportings to the Post Board so that you have qualified officers on your staff. Is that right?
Correct.
They're kept in the ordinary course of your business, I guess, in the police department.
There.
This time I'd like to show the witness only, Exhibit 203 for identification. All right, Inspector, can you take a look at Exhibit 203 and I'll ask you to just rotate through some of the pages so the witness can examine. You familiar with these records?
I am.
How are you familiar with them?
So these are training records that we track in our workforce director system. We maintain these records. Each officer has to sign in at training, usually in the morning and the afternoon. And then our civilian coordinator will upload these into the officer's file so we can keep track of the training, or if somebody didn't make the training, who needs to make it up. And it's in-service training and any additional training that they had on duty.
And I'd like you to go to the back page to show the last page of the witness. Right, and you see that this particular workforce record goes back to 2003. Why is that?
That's when workforce director started, I believe.
Prior to that, there was some different system,
Just paper system.
And how long are those records retained?
So in workforce director or in our...
How long does MPD retain the training records pre-workforce director?
So the city retains records for 7 years. So once we have them, we'll keep this in our workforce director. Some training syllabuses and itineraries are put on an M drive. Paper copies are generally archived at some point. They're brought down to a central location within the city.
But for 7 years?
Correct.
Okay. So these are the records that we have available for this particular individual, going back to 2003, is that
Yes.
right? Okay.
Why did you keep these if they're only kept for 7 years, 2003, and we're 2021? That's more than 7 years, right?
Is Exhibit 203 the defendant's training records? Exhibit 203, is this
Yes.
the training records of the defendant?
Yes, it is.
I'll offer Exhibit 203.
Any objection? No objection. 203 is received.
Permission to publish. And so I'd like to just, if you could scroll up and highlight this first record entry here. You can see these records are organized in a way that just generally labels the course, and it gives various dates, and then there's a start date and an end date for the participant. Is that right?
Correct.
And then a total number of continuing education credits that are logged. Is that right?
Yes.
A one-day class, you get 7 credits?
Back up through these records. If you could bring it out again.
What, do I give a credit an hour or something?
Slide down, please. Labeled here in the 2019 annual training, that section there. All right, and so you see with these records, it's listed as a 2019 annual in-service training, and it refers to a phase 3. What is the annual in-service training?
So our annual in-service training usually consists of 3 phases of training. The first phase will have 2 days of in-service training for officers, so approximately 14 to 16 hours from January to roughly April. And then phase 2 will roll into our shotgun qualifications or medical training, depending on the curriculum that year, what's in that. And that's usually kind of the beginning of the summer months and the end of the summer months. And then phase 3 is our fall in-service training. And the same thing, it's usually 2 days of different curriculum that we're mandated to do, or that maybe the chief wants us to do, or that we're trying to do professional development courses.
And so regardless of the specific trainer, if an individual from MPD is taking phase 3 2019 annual in-service training, should they be learning the same thing on that particular day as anyone else in MPD taking phase 3 training?
Yes, they should.
If you could zoom out again, go down to 2018 FTO, next page. Oops. Okay, here you see what's marked as a 2018 FTO training program. FTO is Field Training Officer, correct?
Yes.
And so is this a train the trainer program?
Yes, from the FTO coordinator and myself as the FTO lieutenant at the time, put on that training where we brought in a variety of different instructors to teach at that class.
And what is taught at FTO training?
So that was a almost 40-hour course, and we taught, it was a primary emphasis on leadership, the critical decision-making model, effective rope, or it's a recruit observation, and then they're giving tips on train the adult learner, and we do some scenarios in there where they debrief, and defensive tactics. They had a component of human resources, defensive tactics. They had a component of human resources that came in to explain what the dues and of their jobs are as a field training officer. It's basically, we were trying to make sure that they understood what the recruits were being taught, because they're going to evaluate them out there, and they're the closest thing to a supervisor that young recruit officer has.
And if I understood your prior testimony, defensive tactics and use of force is something that's trained every year during the regular in-service. Is that right?
Correct.
So, for example, in 2018, the defendant would have been instructed in defensive tactics and proper use of force at least twice, right? Once during this 2018 FTO training program and once during the regular in-service.
Correct.
And if we can, I'd like to, at this time, just to the witness, display Exhibit 275. At Exhibit 275, does that appear to be handwritten records, like a sign-in roster for a particular course?
It is.
The particular course includes patrol ops, and then there's a parenthesis, as taught in the academy, and defensive tactics as taught in the academy. Is that right?
Correct.
And the second name on this list, does that appear to be the name of the defendant?
It is.
Right, and so does Exhibit 275 indicate that the defendant did receive on November 30, 2018, a block of defensive tactics training as taught in the academy?
Yes.
Offer Exhibit 275.
No objection. 275 is received.
Permission to publish.
Then.
And if you could highlight this portion. And you can see the number of training hours here was
Great.
8. Is
Yes,
that
he
right?
signed in for training. I'm going
Correct.
to pause this.
Prone and just putting them on their side or upright position.
How soon are they supposed to do that prior to or after getting the person under control in the prone position?
As soon as possible.
How long have you known about the potential dangers of positional asphyxia?
We were taught positional asphyxia all the way back to my academy.
At the Minneapolis Police Department.
Yes.
Have the dangers of positional asphyxia been known throughout the department at least as long as you've been employed there?
Correct.
And your employment overlaps, with the defendants, is that correct?
Yes.
As part of the medical training, do you, in addition to the actual how-to of providing emergency medical care, are officers taught their obligations to provide and render emergency assistance when the circumstances arise?
Yes, it's in policy as well as training.
You're familiar with the Minneapolis critical decision-making model?
I am.
And that model, you've seen the circle, we've all seen the circle now a few times, that model is infused throughout different portions of the training materials at MPD, is that right?
It is.
Why is that?
We wanted to ensure the officers, a lot of experienced officers understand that critical decision-making model. The more experience you have, the more you can walk through it. But we found it critical that recruits learn it early on. It was helping them connect the dots better with information they were receiving on the scene and working through that wheel, constantly reassessing, and then using the pillars of procedural justice in the middle. And so we wanted to...
So far, she comes off as a pretty credible witness. I'm not seeing bias. We'll see when the defense questioners, if she seems suddenly that she can't remember and she asks a lot of questions and she makes it seem like she can't understand, then I'll change my mind. But right now, she's coming off fairly credible and a pretty good witness.
Consistent with our field training officer program to debrief them, the recruits, and then in our in-service so that officers out there could constantly reassess situations when they're on a scene.
You said that the critical decision-making model was used to reassess people who are going through the FTO process?
Yes, in the field training officer program, we had scenarios where we had the field training officer debrief. At the time, we used community service officers as role players, so we had them debrief using that after a scenario.
So going through the steps of taking in information, assessing risk, assessing threats, reassessing, evaluating goals, and then relating that to the pillars of procedural justice. That's something that any field training officer would be required to do with the people that they're evaluating, correct?
Correct.
In your defensive tactics training, you are not only showing or having officers learn, sort of the nuts and bolts of defensive tactics, but also the rules of engagement. Is that right?
Correct.
Right. And those are contained in the Minneapolis Police Departmental policies. Is that right?
Yes.
And the rules are the rules. They apply to everyone. They apply to you.
Yes.
They apply to recruits. They apply to cadets. They apply to people on field training and experienced officers as well. Is that right?
Correct.
All right.
They're going to try and say because he has 20 years on and he was an FTO,
I'd
he
like
was
to
more
show you
experienced. He
what's
should
been
have known.
received as Exhibit 17. I'm going to ask you, officer, as you look at Exhibit 17, is this a trained technique that's by the Minneapolis Police Department when you were overseeing the training unit?
It is not.
Okay, why not?
Well, use of force according to policy has to be, consistent with MPD training. And what we train are neck restraints, the conscious and unconscious neck restraint. So per policy, a neck restraint is compressing one or both sides of the neck using an arm or leg. But what we train is using one arm or two arm to do a neck restraint.
Okay. And how does this differ?
She just said you could use.
I don't know what kind of improvised.
She just said you could use one or both sides of the neck for the neck restraint. You could use your arm or leg.
Position that is. So that's not what we train.
All right.
Yeah.
You can take that down. Thank you.
Okay, so that's not what she trains. However, officer, the defense ought to say, although you train something one way, is it not true that sometimes the resistive actions of the suspect prevents somebody to put something exactly as they were trained? For instance, if I swing at you with my baton, which I'm authorized to hit you with, at a target area on the shoulder, which is an authorized target area, but the suspect charges me and ducks and I hit him in the head, is that I'm not following policy, or is that the suspect caused me not to hit the target? That's where he needs to go with this.
I have no further questions.
You may.
Yo, man, your wife said to my wife that she wasn't a good cook. Well, I don't care. I like my wife's cooking. Well, what about... I'm just telling you what they're talking about. They make it look like it's important, but there's all kind of crazy stuff. Hey, man, can we have beer night after this is over? Yeah, sure. All right. So this is going to go a lot of ways. Because Chauvin is an FTO and he's been on the job for 20 years, it makes it look like he's more experienced and he should have been better at evaluating and should have been better. But that also is a double-edged sword because he has so much more experience and because he's senior and he's got all his training, maybe he saw things that an inexperienced officer did not say, and that's why he chose not to move. I think we're still running, but it paused. Huh. I'm going to pause this till he starts talking. She's wearing a body cam in here. It'd be funny if it was on and she got all the freaking jurors and then somebody did a Freedom of Information Act and all the jurors were on her body cam. I'm kind of surprised. Isn't it funny? She works in a freaking office in the training division and she has a body camera on coming to court. But every time there's a damn SWAT entry or some major incident, the cops don't have their body cam. They're not required. Plainclothes officers, they were on a special detail. They weren't required. Yet she can wear one to court? Really? Rick, why are you picking on her? Because she's a woman. I'm not picking on her. I'm just pointing things out that are inconsistent that we're always being told as pesky citizens and how government tells us how competent they are and how great they are when in fact it isn't so. So they went outside to talk, so they must have wanted to take their mask off, get heated. Hopefully it'll fire back up here.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir.
Just want a few follow-up questions. In terms of any in-service, you see, when we look at the exhibit, you see 2020 defensive tactics in service, and it's worth 8 hours of time. Agreed?
Correct.
Now, in that course of that 8 hours, officers may go through multiple trainings during that 8-hour time, right?
Correct. They rotate through things.
I'm sorry?
They can rotate through different.
Right. So within that 8-hour time frame, they may get a class or an hour-long class on, say, the human factors of force, or they may get an hour-long course on handcuffing techniques. It varies within each of those 8-hour time frames, right?
Correct.
Now, have you maintained a list that shows 2020, these are the classes that occurred during those 8 hours?
We have.
Okay. And have you provided that list to, in response to the search warrant that was executed at the police department?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in terms of
He's saying he didn't
the
get it.
defensive training tactics or any of these continuing education classes, there are other officers that actually train these classes, and multiple officers may appear during that 8-hour time, multiple trainers, right?
Yes, we have part-time trainers.
So there would be maybe one person will teach the human factors of force, someone else may train on crisis intervention, and there'll be multiple instructors, right?
Correct.
But a lot of the instructors will use materials from past instructors, or they'll take combinations of things and they'll just represent it in a slightly different format, right?
At times, yes.
Right. And I just, for the record, I want to ask you.
So he's going here to show that the training is not consistent and that it's not reasonable that they say absolutely Chauvin received this training this way from this officer. It doesn't seem like they can produce that.
You were served, or the Minneapolis Police Department was served with a search warrant requesting all of the training materials for the four involved officers in this case, right?
Correct.
And so this would be materials that were from the police academy, some materials that were from in service, just a variety of different records, right?
Correct.
All training.
Some 30,000 pages, perhaps?
Thousands, yeah.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Right. Thank you, Inspector. You are excused.
Okay, so I don't think she was a real critical witness. I'm not sure what she did. Maybe he just got her in to get the records in to say that she's a custodian. Sometimes you want the custodian to validate evidence so you can show a chain of custody and who's responsible for it. And so maybe they brought her in as a custodian of records to get these records in. I'm not real sure what her testimony did, to be honest. But anyway, we'll end that there.